your Assembly Bill number 22 of 2023 be now read a second time. Honorable Speaker, this privatization bill 2023 is formulated, Honorable Speaker, as a next generation legal framework that, amongst other things, seeks to overcome the shortcomings and challenges that were associated with the current law, that is a Privatization Act that was enacted in the year 2005. Honorable Speaker, prior to the coming into effect of the Privatization Act of 2005, privatization transactions of the government were guided by the policy paper on public enterprises reforms and privatization of 1998, with the then Permanent Secretary to the Treasury Incorporation Act as a legal framework. In an effort, Honorable Speaker, to enhance transparency in the privatization transactions, the Privatization Act of 2005 was assented to in the year 2005. However, it was not until the year 2008 that this law came into effect. The Act, Honorable Speaker, established the Privatization Commission, whose mandate is to implement privatization. The objectives of the privatization, as envisaged in this Act, Honorable Speaker, are: one, to improve on the infrastructure and delivery of public services by the involvement of private capital and expertise. Two is towards the reduction of the demand for government resources, and also to generate additional government revenues by receiving compensation for privatizations, amongst other objectives. Honorable Speaker, in realization of the objectives of the Privatization Act as enacted in 2005, and as I mentioned, that came into effect in 2008, the principal objectives, as I've stated, of engaging in privatization endeavors by government is: one, to divest, or rather government to divest from commercial enterprises, Honorable Speaker, with the objective of: one, raising resources for government; two, Honorable Speaker, as you have seen with the privatization of many enterprises, government or state-owned enterprises, is to enhance efficiency in the operations of these institutions or organizations, Honorable Speaker, by injecting: one, private capital, Honorable Speaker, where government is limited in terms of the amount of capital that you can inject into state corporations, but also to inject, other than capital, Honorable Speaker, private sector expertise into the running of state-owned enterprises, and therefore enhancing efficiency and delivery of services to the public. And Honorable Speaker, the most effective of this privatization, Honorable Speaker, came in the privatization of what was then the Kenya Posts and Telecommunications Corporation, KPTC, that was at one time headed, I think, by the Honorable Tjkajwang, on one of the offshoots, was headed by Honorable Tjkajwang, I think, CAK. And Honorable Speaker, the huge investments you have seen in the telecom sector, Honorable Speaker, after the privatization of KPTC, or the Kenya Posts and Telecommunications Corporation, Honorable Speaker, is what led to what now is Safaricom, Honorable Speaker, Telcom, as we know it today. And as I mentioned, Honorable Speaker, the injection of private capital when the investors that came into Safaricom invested in Safaricom. That is how we have seen the country grow in leaps and bounds in terms of the telecoms sector. And you can imagine, Honorable Speaker, had we not privatized this sector, or KPTC as it were then, we would not have benefited from the private sector capital that came through Vodafone and other investors, including members of the public who have invested in Safaricom and other state-owned corporations. And I'm just using Safaricom as an example, Honorable Speaker, being one of our success stories of what has come out of the privatization efforts over the years. Honorable Speaker, however, as it turned out, the Privatization Act of 2005 has been as facilitative for privatization transaction as was, or rather has not been as effective as was contemplated by the Act. And in particular, Honorable Speaker, lengthy privatization processes have required a large layer of approval of decisions at various stages, and this has made the process of privatization very inefficient. In fact, Honorable Speaker, looking at the process, in 2008, Honorable Speaker, after coming into effect of the Privatization Act, Honorable Speaker, 28 corporations were listed for privatization. And Honorable Speaker, out of these 28 corporations that were listed for privatization in 2008, in fact, Honorable Speaker, it was 26 entities that were approved by Parliament for privatization in 2008 under the privatization program, as approved then. Only one, Honorable Speaker, and it is one out of 26 entities that were listed for privatization, only the Kenya Wine Agencies Limited has been undertaken. And that, Honorable Speaker, speaks to the issues I'm speaking to of inefficiencies under the 2005 Privatization Act. And Honorable Speaker, it's not just the layer of approvals that were required and the bureaucracies that came with it, Honorable Speaker, but also a litany of court cases, Honorable Speaker, that have bedeviled the privatization process. And Honorable Speaker, protracted court proceedings are amongst these challenges, Honorable Speaker, that have resulted in the slow implementation of privatization. There also have been undue delays in implementation process, as I said, due to the multiple layer of approvals required by various institutions, and also delays in the provision of information during privatization, Honorable Speaker, from the entities themselves. And therefore, this new legal framework under this privatization bill seeks to deal with some of these hurdles and challenges. One, to create efficiencies in the provision of information and even in the formulation of privatization programs, to ensure, Honorable Speaker, that once a program is approved, then the multi-layer approvals, including, Honorable Speaker, approval, and I've just had a discussion with the chair of the committee, because I'm aware the committee had other views in terms of the approval processes by Parliament. And Honorable Speaker, Parliament has a role in a privatization process because these are public entities. And I want to agree with the committee that indeed Parliament must have a role as the people charged with oversight of public resources. Public resources have been deployed in the investments that are state-owned corporations. And therefore, if you are to sell or if you are to privatize these state-owned corporations, then Parliament must have a role in government being able to divest from those entities, Honorable Speaker, to ensure, one, that there is actual and active public participation in these processes as was envisaged by our Constitution. Honorable Speaker, however, the Constitution never envisaged a process where then Parliament also becomes a hindrance to the efficiency of such privatization engagements, Honorable Speaker. And therefore, part of the reasons that, again, Honorable Speaker, that informed this new legal framework under the current Privatization Act, it was required that even the Privatization Commission, which, Honorable Speaker, is not a constitutional commission, ought to have been approved by Parliament. Honorable Speaker, under the 2010 Constitution, because this law was done before the 2010 Constitution, under the 2010 Constitution, it became a prerequisite that only independent constitutional commissions would require the prior approval of Parliament before people taking into office. Honorable Speaker, this new act or this new bill, the privatization bill, bill number 22 of 2023, seeks to address some of those issues. That since the Privatization Commission is not a constitutional commission, then we must not make it mandatory that members of this commission be approved by the National Assembly. However, I am in agreement with the committee that for the privatization program, that then there is a case for the involvement of Parliament because it involves public resources. But for the appointment of commissioners to the commission, that, Honorable Speaker, may not require the approval of Parliament because in line with the Constitution of 2010, only independent constitutional commissions require the approval of Parliament. Honorable Speaker, this new bill seeks now to succeed, or rather to create a new body, the Privatization Authority. Honorable Speaker, I think they are calling it the Privatization Authority. And this Privatization Authority, Honorable Speaker, will be the successor of the Privatization Commission. And this authority, Honorable Speaker, again, the proposal was that this being just an authority and will be governed by a board, that board does not necessarily, just like all other boards to state entities, they never require parliamentary approval. And I think we have had consultations with the chair and the committee that we do agree with what is provided for in the bill, that the board then can be set up without necessarily coming to the National Assembly or to Parliament for approval. However, Parliament has a role in oversighting that board in their dealings in matters to do with privatization. And again, Honorable Speaker, as I have stated, that is where I want to agree with the committee that when it comes to the privatization program, then Parliament ought to have a role. Honorable Speaker, this authority, once established, will have certain functions, and amongst some of the functions of this authority will include advising the government on all aspects of privatization of public entities. It will also be facilitating the implementation of the government policies on privatization and implementing specific privatization proposals in accordance with the privatization program. Honorable Speaker, Part 2 of this bill is what members will see provides for the function of this board, and also the function of the Cabinet Secretary, which will include providing policy direction on matters related to privatization and developing and formulating the privatization program, which, Honorable Speaker, I'm saying that is where now, as we go into the third reading or committee of the whole, Honorable Speaker, we should look at how we can then get Parliament or the people's representatives being involved, either in the approval of the privatization program or the policies as the CS will formulate. This part of Part 2 of the bill, Honorable Speaker, also provides for the appointment and functions of Managing Director, the Corporation Secretary, and staff of the authority. Part 3 of the bill, Honorable Speaker, deals with the privatization program, and if you go to clause 18, Honorable Speaker, all the bill, it provides that a privatization program shall be formulated by the Cabinet Secretary in accordance with the Acts, that is the Privatization Act, and approved by Cabinet. It will specify the public entities identified and approved for privatization and serve as a basis upon which the privatization shall be undertaken. This part also, Honorable Speaker, makes provisions for the formulation of the program, which includes identification of entities to be included in the privatization program in line with the considerations, public consultations during development and notification of, by Parliament before implementation of the program. It further specifies the validity period of the program as not exceeding 5 years from the date of gazettement, and such validity may only be extended for a further 12 months or a further 1 year. Therefore, such a program, Honorable Speaker, in line with this part, means that a privatization program can only run to a maximum of 6 years. Honorable Speaker, you can imagine the privatization program of 2008 of those 26 state corporations, as I've mentioned, only QUAL, or the Kenya Wines Agencies, has been successful, and the program has been in existence from 2008. We are now in the year 2023, that is 15 years later. We are now putting a time limit under this new act that such a privatization program can only run for 5 years. And if within 5 years you have government has not finished that program, they can only seek a further extension of only 12 months to be able to conclude that program. So that again, Honorable Speaker, we ensure that there is efficiency in the privatization of state-owned entities. Honorable Speaker, there is a reason as to why there is a time limit, Honorable Speaker. And this is informed by the fact that for you to be able to derive actual value from state entities that you want to privatize, then time is of essence, Honorable Speaker. Not just in terms of the time value of money, but also, Honorable Speaker, you can imagine there are entities or state-owned entities whose value today will not be the same 15 years down the line. And therefore, there are state entities that government envisaged to privatize 15 years ago, and we have derived very good value out of those state entities. But because of advancement in technology and changes in the global economy, some of those state entities have now become moribund, and even the technologies they are applying, Honorable Speaker, are not technologies, Honorable Speaker, that would derive value in today's world. And therefore, the Kenyan people or the public will not derive the true value of an entity if the process is so protracted and runs for 15 years, as was happening under the old Privatization Act. Therefore, Honorable Speaker, under this new privatization bill, we will seek to ensure that there are timelines, strict timelines, under which to implement a privatization program. So that if you are privatizing, for instance, a technology-based company, you do not take 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, and by the time you are seeking to privatize, the value of that company has dropped to almost negligible figures, and therefore the public loses value. The intent of this bill, Honorable Speaker, if it becomes an act, Honorable Speaker, is to ensure that we derive value at the right time, when we can derive the maximum value out of the state-owned enterprises that we seek to privatize. And I do hope, Honorable Speaker, that members will support this bill to ensure that we never lose value. Honorable Speaker, you have seen how the Honorable Angwe has been active in pushing through the sugar bill. You can imagine, Honorable Speaker, if, for instance, the sugar companies in the Western Kenya belt and parts of the coast were privatized, say 10, 15 years ago, the value would have derived out of those sugar companies, that some that we have been just talking about their privatization, but it has never happened. And I want to pray, Honorable Speaker, that this time round we shall get it right. So that, Honorable Speaker, we do not punish another generation. We have wasted 15 years trying to privatize state-owned entities. Some, Honorable Speaker, if you visit some of those state-owned entities that were earmarked for privatization, they are basically dead, Honorable Speaker. Some today, if you were to privatize them today, you would sell them for a song or for no value, Honorable Speaker. But had we done it at the right time, Honorable Speaker, we would have derived value for the public. Those entities would have become more efficient. We would have been able to deploy private capital, therefore enhancing efficiency in the operations of those entities. We'd have been able to deploy private expertise or expertise from the private sector. Honorable Speaker, I mentioned the sugar industry because it is one such case. Well, Honorable Speaker, whether you go to Mumias, whether you go to Nzoia, whether it is Sony Sugar, Honorable Speaker, you'll be shocked that the kind of equipment that is in those sugar companies, Honorable Speaker, are so moribund and inefficient that it becomes so expensive to run those entities. And that is the reason why you will see the people of Mumias, every successive administration from the Kibaki administration to the Kenyatta administration, now with the exception of the RUTO administration, has pumped money into Mumias. But what have we derived out of the money that we have pumped into Mumias, Honorable Speaker? Absolutely nothing. So we have wasted a lot of public resources pumping into inefficient entities, Honorable Speaker, and that is what is informing this privatization bill, that we will enhance the efficiency with which we privatize state-owned entities, so that we deploy private capital, private expertise, private technology from the private sector, Honorable Speaker. If we had deployed private expertise in Mumias, Honorable Speaker, the cartels that have been running the sugar sector in Kenya would have been driven out of business years ago. And I must take this opportunity, Honorable Speaker, to commend His Excellency the President. Because he has said, and he has told these cartels that there are only 3 things to do in this country. And in those words, Honorable Speaker, if I may quote him, he has said, mambo ni matatu. And in this mambo ni matatu, Honorable Speaker, because we have been speaking about the fight against corruption, Honorable Speaker. And I say speaking, Honorable Speaker, because all we have done in this country is to speak about the fight against corruption. Nobody has been bold enough to act on issues corruption. I must commend the President because he has indeed shown the country that with the mambo ni matatu, he intends to act on corruption, not to speak about corruption. Honorable Speaker, you remember in the last regime, at one point during a State of the Nation address, the former president, speaking about corruption, fired over 200 public officers, many of whom ended up getting back into public service, because we are all accustomed to speaking about corruption. Honorable Speaker.
Honorable Kajwang, what's out of order?
Madam Speaker, the majority leader is referring to what we have had out there as mambo matatu. Mambo ni matatu. Can majority leader confirm that he is encouraging extrajudicial killing or people being sentenced to prison without judicial trial, or others deported to places without judicial, without procedure, due procedure, sending to heaven, sending to heaven, or sending to jail without judicial processes? Does that confirm that the majority leader is encouraging those practices?
Majority leader, did you encourage extrajudicial killings?
You know, Honorable Speaker, you know, my good friend TJ knows I have never encouraged anything extrajudicial. In fact, under the last regime, when people were cheering extrajudicial killings, when bodies were being fished out of Rivayala, when young men and women were being executed for supporting the then Deputy President and their bodies dumped in their badeas, I was among the few Kenyans, very few, Honorable Speaker, who had the courage, when Honorable TJ could not master that courage, to speak truth to power, that you cannot kill Kenyans for supporting or taking a certain political inclination or supporting a deputy president. Honorable Speaker, the book of Ezra 7:26 is what I would just want to read for my good friend TJ, who I know is a Christian, because it's called Tom Joseph Kajwang. Therefore, Honorable Tom Joseph Kajwang, the book of Ezra 26, Ezra 7:26, says that whoever does not obey the law of your God and the law of the king must surely be punished by death, banishment, confiscation of property, or imprisonment. Mambo ni matatu. Honorable Speaker, the holy book in the book of Ezra speaks about banishment for those who do not obey the law. If you engage in corruption, you must be banished.
Majority leader, Honorable Kajwang, what is out of order?
Now, Madam Speaker, the debate is getting lively, but the majority leader is really getting it rough. Because first of all, now he's postulating that the laws of this country are being led by Torah, and he is now giving a Christian background to demonstrate that extrajudicial killing and the rule of kingship, that perhaps is even right, that the regime in which we are under is a kingdom led by the kings, and if you dare face the king, then you are banished or you die. Is that the position that the majority leader is espousing?
Majority, Honorable Sunkuli, what is out of order?
What is out of order, Madam Speaker, is that the Honorable Ichungwa, the leader of majority, needs to explain to us, maybe, because he's quite knowledgeable, of how the third option of going to heaven can be exercised without death. And also, Madam Speaker, to explain to us how Ezra, written 5,000 years ago, applies in a situation where democracy is now reigning. Because during the days of Ezra, there was only one person. That was God, and the other person was the king. Here, we have neither the king, and God is for us all. But I'm more interested in knowing whether he also believes that there is a way of going to heaven like the Holy Mary.
You've made your point. I don't know how you know who was there, but majority leader, continue.
Honorable Speaker, you know, now the Honorable Sunkuli is inviting me into a class of theology. And because I am a Christian, member number 39 of Gikambura district of the Presbyterian Church of East Africa, Reverend Musagitao PCA Church, I will invite the Honorable Sunkuli to my church during one of the cell group meetings, and I'll take him on a class on theology, so that he knows when the Bible speaks about the king is the Lord, not the earthly kings. And that also answers Honorable TJ. When the Bible speaks about banishment for the corrupt, for the sugar cartels, that is why they have been told mambo ni matatu: uhame Kenya, uende jela, ama utafute tikiti ya kwenda Mbinguni. If you want to find a ticket to heaven, accept the Lord and no corruption is evil. And I want to invite the Honorable TJ, the Honorable Sunkuli, and all our other colleagues, please accept to get the ticket to heaven by not just speaking about corruption, but acting against corruption. These sugar cartels, Honorable Speaker, rode on state capture in the last regime. And Honorable Speaker, because we are talking about those three things, those three choices, Honorable Speaker, probably I would add a fourth option, that maybe it is time that we now begin to have the conversation on the establishment of a state capture commission, so that this country gets the opportunity to truly interact with what has actually bedeviled the fabric of our nation in the economic management of our resources, our national resources, Honorable Speaker. Because it is sad that as political leaders, we shout from the rooftops and shout loudly about our fight against corruption. But when it comes to acting on issues corruption, we are the first to use politics to defend the corrupt. We are the first to use state capture to advance our own selfish business interests at the expense of the greater public good, Honorable Speaker. Maybe it is time, Honorable Speaker, we began to have that conversation as a country. Because probably we have never gotten it right on the fight against corruption, because we always tend to politicize it. And I want to repeat, Honorable Speaker, those three choices are open, not to Kenyans, not to good Kenyans, not to law-abiding Kenyans, not to hard-working Kenyans, but those options are open to the corrupt. Those who believe that they can use their offices in public office as state officers to enrich themselves at the expense of the people who put them in those offices, Honorable Speaker. And that is why I'm saying maybe it is time, and I want to invite the Honorable TJ to join us and other Kenyans who believe that it is time to have that conversation on state capture and maybe establish a state capture commission. Honorable Speaker, I would have ignored what the Honorable TJ is saying, that he has no shares in that company. I do not know which company, but I know, because I can hear what he's saying from his position. He's speaking about none other than the Deputy President, who has spoken about shareholding in government. And Honorable Speaker, without defending the Deputy President, because this thing also has been taken out of context. The Deputy President indicated that you are shareholders in government, not in Kenya. Government is established by those who are elected by the people to govern. You subscribe your shares into a government by voting for that government. But you remain a Kenyan and you remain a shareholder in Kenya, including the corrupt, who we are telling they will either be banished, jail, or they will find a ticket to heaven. Whichever way they find a ticket to heaven, whether be it through salvation, be it through restitution by giving back what they have taken from the Kenyan people, and seeking forgiveness from the Almighty God and the people of Kenya. You may find your way to heaven in many ways, Honorable TJ and Honorable Sunkuli. I want to beseech you, if you know those cartels, if you speak to the masters of doublespeak, the merchants of state capture, if you have a direct line to them, please tell them time is nigh. But Honorable Speaker, going back to this bill, because this bill will address some of those issues. So that, Honorable Speaker, you will remember in the last parliament, and Honorable TJ is fortunate to have been with me in the last parliament. You will remember the issues to do with the Kenya shipping line. You will remember the retrogressive laws that we made sure never saw the light of day. And I must thank the Honorable TJ, because on the National Aviation Bill, he was very emphatic that we must not use state capture to privatize state-owned corporations like the Kenya Airports Authority in order to achieve selfish family and private interests, as well as envisaged under the National Aviation Bill that came to us and the Honorable TJ in the last parliament. Honorable TJ and members, honorable members, I want to invite you that this is a law that will ensure never again in this country shall a president, and I repeat again, Honorable Speaker, never again shall a president in this country use his office, use state capture to advance the interests of a family or his own private interests, or indeed, for that matter, any member of the executive. This House must take its place to ensure that we play our oversight role, to ensure that never again shall anybody in the executive use state capture to take over state-owned entities. That the privatization program, as approved, will be followed to the letter and within strict timelines to ensure that value is realized not for private entities, not for private individuals or families, but for the people who own these state-owned enterprises. Because these state-owned enterprises are not government entities. These are public entities owned by the people of Kenya, Honorable Speaker, and we must protect them. We must ensure that if they are to be sold, they are not sold for a song. The people of Webuye will tell you in Western Kenya, in Bungoma County, They will tell you what happened to Webuye paper mills. And it is the same cartels under state capture, Honorable Speaker, that utilize state capture in the pretext of privatization to take over Webuye paper mills. They have killed all our sugar industries, state-owned sugar industries, to advance the private interests of private sugar mills, Honorable Speaker. And you do that because you know you are protected by those in power. Honorable Speaker, it is my submission today that those things now will become a thing of the past. And I want to invite all members of this House, Honorable Speaker, not only to support this bill, Honorable Speaker, not only to speak about corruption, but to act against corruption. Let us not be excited in defending the corrupt. Let us not be so quick to rise, not only to defend, but to protect cartels that are injuring and killing our people in Western Kenya and other parts of the country through corruption. Honorable Speaker. Honorable Speaker, I have said too much, probably more than I should have said, but this bill, Honorable Speaker, speaks volumes as to how we will ensure that we privatize our state-owned entities, derive maximum value for our people, enhance efficiency in the provision of services through these corporations, utilize private capital and private expertise in the running of state-owned enterprises, Honorable Speaker, grow wealth, not just for those that invest in these state entities, but also grow wealth for our country, Honorable Speaker. And more importantly, Honorable Speaker, ensure that the Kenyan people indeed enjoy the fruits of their labor, because it is their labor that has provided taxes that have been invested in these state-owned entities. And therefore, through their elected representatives, Honorable Speaker, they will be able to oversight how these entities are privatized. They will be able to oversight how the executive rolls out the programs in a time-bound program, as I said, in 5 years, as has been stipulated in the bill, with a possible extension of only 1 year, so that we never see what has happened over the last 15 years, that we had a program to privatize 26 state-owned enterprises, and 15 years down the line, we have only been able to actualize one. I pray, Honorable Speaker, that this Parliament will midwife a new legal framework that will see us privatize state-owned enterprises, so that also as we appropriate resources, Honorable Speaker, we no longer have to appropriate national government resources towards the running of state-owned enterprises, which, if they are injected with private capital and we brought in private sector expertise in the running of those enterprises, they would be contributors to the exchequer, like Safaricom today is contributing to the exchequer, not taking away money to the exchequer. I look forward, Honorable Speaker, to a time when our sugar companies that are state-owned Mumias will not be looking for money from the exchequer. Mumias will be contributing money to the exchequer. Kenya Airways, Honorable Speaker, will not be gobbling 20, 30 billion shillings of our exchequer resources almost every financial year, but will be putting back 30, 50 billion shillings back into the exchequer as dividends, Honorable Speaker, even as they pay dividends to those who will have invested in them privately, Honorable Speaker. And with those, Honorable Speaker, in closing, that is the last objective of the privatization of state-owned entities, to ensure that we no longer have to appropriate our national resources to run state-owned enterprises, but to inject efficiency, inject private capital and private expertise to be able to derive more value out of these entities as they contribute to the exchequer, Honorable Speaker. And I look forward to that day very soon. And I'm sure under the able leadership of President William Ruto and his cabinet, and with the able support of all well-meaning members of parliament who shall not defend corruption, who shall not defend cartels, we will see that day come when we shall no longer invest money in KQ, but KQ will be giving the government of Kenya money. Honorable Speaker, with those many remarks, I beg to move and request the chair of the Finance and Planning Committee, who together with this committee have done a commendable job in processing this bill and taking it through public participation, to second. And let me, in closing, take this opportunity to thank the Finance and Planning Committee through its very able chair, the member for Molo, for the work that they put in, and look forward to the
Thank you, Majority Leader. Honorable Kimani Kuria.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, I beg to move that the privatization bill be read a second time, or to second that the privatization